Okay, we are recording. Here we go. We're on. We're on. Guys, welcome back to Let's Get Freaky podcast. Super excited to be here and super excited to welcome a very special guest tonight. Let's Get Freaky legend. Let's Get Freaky goat.
Oh,
JJRose777. How are we? Welcome back to Let's Get Freaky. It's been
thank
too
you,
long.
Tommy. I'm so excited to be here, and I'm so excited for this episode. Thank you for letting me do something that's very outside of my normal box.
Oh, I'm excited. I'm excited. And what we're talking about tonight has been fascinating me for a long time. I'm very excited to get into it. Firstly, how are you? Welcome. Welcome back.
Oh, I'm wonderful, City. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. I'm excited to have you back. It's been too long. I know
I
we
know.
talk a lot, but
We
recording, we haven't
do.
done one for a while.
I know. I it feels like it wasn't that long ago, but apparently it was.
Yeah,
So
the time just flies. And I
it
think I've told
really
you this
has been.
before. I've told you this, but my mum is a massive fan of you, JJ. She always says
Oh,
to me, "When's JJ coming back?" I'm like, "She's coming back. Don't worry." So
hi,
shout out my
Mom.
mum. Yeah.
I adore her. You tell her she needs anything, call me.
Ah, I will do. She'll love that.
I'm serious,
So,
Mom.
yes. So, shall I start with what we're talking about tonight? Shall we get into it?
Please.
So, tonight, I've spoke many times on the show before, especially recently, how much I want to move to New England. I keep talking about it. I feel like I've got a pull. It's just something I've always loved that place. Like, and I've always wanted to end up there one day, and really thinking about it at the moment. Would love to do it. Maybe as the kids get a little bit older. I mean, at the moment might not be right, but definitely in the future, would love to go to New England, and especially to a place called Salem, which is where we're going to be focusing tonight. Um,
Indeed.
Magical place. I've not been there yet. I've spoke to a lot of people that have been there, watched a lot of videos on it, and everyone says there is a feeling there of, I know obviously the history that it's got, but there is a feeling of magic there. And obviously you've got a lot of witches shops and stuff like that, and that adds to it. But what a place. Have you been there, JJ?
Not physically. Astrally, a friend of mine was going, and she's kind of used to my weird side quests that I ask of her. And her husband is not really a believer, we'll put it that way. I mean, he knows about me, he doesn't discount it, but he's just kind of like, whatever. And he was like, all right, fine, like we'll detour off the road. And so she goes, well, where are we going? And I said, do me a favor, like get on to the main road, and then you'll see a crow and it will lead you to the shop that I need you to go to. Cause it's a couple like side streets off. So in her mind, she's literal because she knows me. She's looking for an actual crow. Her husband, on the other hand, is looking for a sign with a crow on it or like a street name. So they walk a couple car lengths down, and this crow literally drops down in front of them on the ground and then just starts walking. And she's following it. Her husband's like, no, 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 we're supposed to like look for a street or something. She's like, no, we're literally following this crow. And this crow took her a block and a half and then led her to a store, went to the store, tapped on the door, like here, and then flew off. And so she goes in and she's trying to figure out what it is that I'm asking her for. And finally, I said, well, put your hand over the counter. And when your hand warms up, that's the item that I need. And so she's having a hard time. So she gets the woman from the store on the phone. And the woman, I'm walking her through this. And I'm describing the shop and what the woman's looking at. And I'm not on a video call, right? I'm just on a regular phone.
Oh,
And the
Matt,
girl behind the counter
you
starts
can
freaking
see.
out.
You can
Yeah,
see.
I'm astrally there. I'm just not physically there, right? And so the poor girl behind the counter, she goes, I thought I was a witch, but not like you. So, so apparently she freaked out, and then my friend's husband apparently freaked out because this is the first time he had really like seen everything and heard it. And he
Wow.
was even like, okay, yeah, there's a little something like different with her.
How did you know the crow was going to be there?
I sent it.
That is amazing.
Yeah, I work with the crows. They help me, I help them. I have
Wow.
a budget every month that I feed them. So
Wow.
they pass it along.
Well, I've had experiences where I know in the past, and I think I've shared this on the show before, when you've helped me in the past when I've had problems in the house with possible spirits, entities, and you've astrally come to the house and explained where everything is in my house. And I know you've not seen it. I've never put it out, like every room in my house and the layout of my house. And you was like, yeah, you go upstairs, look left is your bedroom. And I'm like, what? So it is wild.
Yeah, in your kitchen with that piece of furniture that I had to like almost draw for you because I was like, I don't know what the technical name for this is. I have Googled, like my Google searches are full of the weirdest things. Google's probably like, who are you? Because I'm trying to like explain things to people. And, like I don't know what that is. So
Yeah.
yeah, I've been in your kitchen, your house, and I've been in your shed more than you have, Tommy. I'm very curious. You need to go clean the shed.
There's something in my shed, I know. We did clear it out and then was getting it
But you
nice. And then,
didn't go to the back right corner, did you?
no, no, I don't know what's there. I do need to. There's so much junk and stuff in there, man. And then we filled it up again recently with more junk. But I'm gonna get in there.
One of
Ah,
these days.
yeah. So you,
And then you'll have all the money you need to move over here because
oh,
America's calling you.
oh man, if there's something in there that's worth money, I need to get in there for sure. Oh wow. Okay, I'm gonna do that tomorrow.
Thank you. Only been bugging you for like a year and a half. So.
So when I know this is not what we're talking about tonight, but when you're astral projecting to play, are you seeing it as if you're there? Are you like
Most
you
of the
can touch
time, yes.
things? Wow.
Yeah. I can like look through drawers and look in things. I mean, like I can be as nosy as I need to be. We'll put it that way. Like I'm a very utilitarian type of person. Like if there's not a need or a function, I don't understand why you would do it.
Hmm.
So I'm not nosy unless someone's like, hey, can you tell me like what in that drawer? In which case I'll be like, okay, go to the left and back, which I've done to a friend of mine and freaked them out because I described exactly what was in the drawer. And they live in another state. I've never been to their home. And
Wow,
they sent
that's
me a picture
wild.
of the drawer and they were like, this is kind of freaking me out. And I'm like, have you not learned by now?
It's wild. It's amazing.
Yeah,
And as I
everyone
say,
has the ability to do it in some capacity.
yeah, super interesting. Super. We'll have to do an whole episode on that, JJ, because that
And we
fascinates me.
will.
Yeah. So, as we were saying in Salem, so you've been to
So
Salem.
Salem,
I find
Salem
it
witch
such.
trials in particular.
Yeah. So that's the main. When you think of Salem, that is what you think of, the witch trials. That is obviously
Yes.
what it's known for. Um, yeah.
So technically, where this all happened with the Salem witch trials is now called Danvers, Massachusetts. So there's Salem, the city, and then there was Salem, the village, way back when, which the village is now Danvers. But Salem's commercialized, and I love the fact that witches are now there and show their presence, especially when by the end of this episode, with all of the notes and information that I have to share, I think it will really explain the importance of why this tradition of keeping this topic alive and discussed is so important. So, the first thing that a lot of people don't realize is Salem Witch Trials was actually America's first government cover up ever.
Interesting.
Yeah. So we are going to go down a little bit of a conspiracy rabbit hole towards the end because I think those are
Love
fun in
that.
order to talk to.
Yeah.
But I do want to get a little, I'm going to get historical heavy, but I'm doing this in order to set the scene so that the average person can understand.
Hmm.
So,
Because what? Sorry to interrupt, but what
yeah.
what what I found quite interested in. So I've been watching documentaries. I've been reading a book, which I told you I've not got too far with, but I have started it. Um, and I've been reading stuff about online. Some of the facts are sometimes there's different dates and sometimes there's different
Mhm.
numbers of people that got killed. It can be very confusing to go down the right route to what actually happened. Have you found that?
Yes. Yeah. Well, and here's the reason why. The reason why is because again, America's first government cover up.
Hmm.
When the
So that makes
trials
sense.
shut
Yeah.
down, right? So when the trials got shut down, which they did, they got shut down. The governor came in and was like, "We're done." Basically, they realized the ish show that had occurred that they kind of blindly let happen. And when they realized the totality of it, they actually ordered most documents and transcripts to be burned. And it was the families of the victims who were taking notes or who had copies who hid them away. That's the only reason why we still know about what we know about today.
Interesting. So do
Yeah.
you think that the government of the time knew that what they'd done was obviously wrong and that there was going to be big retribution?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, basically with how everything went down and the totality of how bad this really was and how out of hand it got, they started to understand that the families of the victims, the innocent people who were hung and killed, um, and or died in jail because of the abhorrent conditions that they were put into, they knew that potentially the crown, because this is 1692, we're still under British rule, right? Even though it was in America proper, but it was still under British rule. They knew that those families could actually go and sue and go all the way up to the monarchy and sue the crown for what was led to have happened. And heads were going to roll if the real truth came out about this and it made it all the way back to the monarchy. So there were a lot of people trying to CYA during this time.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because that's the other thing that I've read. It was 1692,
Mm-hmm.
but wasn't there something to do with the date at the time in Salem was different to the UK date? I don't know if that's there was something like there was a year they were living on different calendars basically.
A little bit, and I think it was off by like either 6 months or a year and a half, something like that. So
Okay.
we're just gonna go with 1692. I
Yeah,
mean, are we
that's good.
getting
Well,
wrapped up in all the details?
that's what the book says as well, 1692.
Yeah, I mean, so this basically all popped off legally in June of 1692. It didn't end really until May of 1693. So it was almost a full year that this hubbub was happening. And it's bad. Now, the reason why I'm talking about this, besides the fact of, who I am and that, I am very open that I am a white witch as well as everything else under my name that I am. So picture it. It's like a year or two before the world shuts down. And it's probably like September, October-ish, right? It's kind of like a misty, cloudy day. And I wasn't sick, but like I just kind of wanted to lay in bed and do nothing that day. So I have the History Channel on, and something comes on about Salem and the witch trials. And it's all about this guy who's a descendant of one of the accusers. And he feels so guilty and he feels like he's been cursed because of what his ancestor did. So he is going to make amends of the graves of the few people who were hung as a result of his ancestors' accusations. And so, he goes up to this grave and he's giving this big apology, very heartfelt, right? And they pan down to the name, and it's a last name that I'm familiar with because I'm related to that last name. So I pause it and I'm like, huh, this sure would explain some things, right? And so I Google it. So I am related to Elias Howe, who was the man who invented the sewing machine. Woohoo! Do we get any money from it? Absolutely not. But because everyone knows Singer, and Singer was the one that he sold the patent to in order to make the machines. But Elias Howe is the actual person who invented the sewing machine. And
Wow.
I know that I'm a direct descendant from him. And the reason why is because we have actually one of his original prototypes. And
Man.
we have a TV on it. It's sad. I'm sorry, but
Oh, wow.
basically, it's very old, and only because I know that the last name stuck out to me. Now, I do have to preface this with saying that I don't know a lot about my family's lineage history. A lot of it isn't talked about. It never really was talked about. Um, this would be my mom's father's side, by the way, that this comes from. Um, my grandpa, his parents both were murdered separately in two separate instances. It was horrible. His father was murdered. It was technically accidental, but he was murdered. It was an accident, but he passed away first. And he was Canadian. And my grandpa actually grew up in Canada, and then they immigrated here and ended up in San Francisco, where they lived during the 1906 San Francisco earthquake, because we had pictures from that as well. I know, I have a really weird lineage.
Wow.
So, and my grandpa grew up during the Depression. So, I heard all the stories of, yeah, my sister and I would go out with a bag of oranges by the freeway and sell them to people. So, I had a lot of that in my history. Like, it wasn't a fun time. My grandpa was in World War II. Um, his father was a raging alcoholic. He was a beautiful painter. He actually painted one of the beautiful theaters in San Francisco. If anyone knows the Orpheum Theater, very few people, unless you know San Francisco. But if you do, that's where like all the big plays would be.
Hmm.
And so like he was really great, but he was an alcoholic. He would go to the bars at night and basically tell everyone he was the premier of Canada. And no one knew what the premier of Canada was, so they believed him, right? He would get people to buy him drinks. So, and his wife, my great grandmother, she this is going to sound sad, but the story was that she was dropped on her head when she was a baby. So she was
That's
very
not funny, JJ.
I'm sorry, I had to cough, I know, but I have to laugh a little bit. I mean, but the reason I bring this up is because she was very sweet, but she was also very naive. So when the first time the Mickey Mouse cartoon came on, Steamboat Willie,
Hmm.
she thought it was an actual mouse playing the piano. She was very excited. Look, there's a mouse playing a piano. Like she couldn't even understand that was a cartoon. So she was very sweet, very naive, but a wonderful, wonderful woman, right? Like very giving and loving. And, her murder was awful and very gruesome. And that was a horrific thing. So my grandfather had a pretty hard time talking about his family and his childhood, and plus, scars from World War II and all of that. So that generation didn't talk about things a whole heck
Hmm.
of a lot.
Yeah.
And as a result of knowing that, I didn't ask a lot of questions. Now, my grandma, his wife, she was adopted when she was young. That was a whole thing. I mean, her mother basically was married before she got with my great grandfather. And the man she was married to went off to World War I, and she was told he had died. So she was a widow. She ended up marrying another man who was my great grandfather. They had my grandma. My grandma had rickets as a kid. Like they weren't living the best of lives. Apparently, he went off to work one day and a man knocked at the door and said, "Honey, I'm home." And it was her husband who came back from the war. Because back then in World War I, they declared a lot of people dead, but they didn't have dog tags and stuff the way that they do now, or
Wow.
IDs. So yeah, so she basically just abandoned my grandmother and her husband and took off with the other man.
That's
So
wild.
yeah, so like you can see that whole side of the family, no one really wants to really talk about stuff because there's like a lot.
Wow.
Yeah, so a lot.
Can
So
how long was he gone for? I know I'm just really intrigued to know that.
I think it was like 5 to 6 years.
Wow, was he like a prisoner or something?
No, I think he got stuck in Europe.
Oh wow. Man,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah, I
wild.
think I think he was wounded, um, and then probably was in a European hospital for a while. And then by the time he actually made it back here
Hmm.
and tracked her down, because she had moved from where she lived with him. And then he found her, and here she is. She has a baby and a new husband. But no, she
Wow.
left my grandma as an infant alone with a note like on her thing saying, "My husband came back. I'm gone." So yeah, lots of trauma, right? So it's a lot of people would think, well, like, why wouldn't you know about your heritage? Well, that's why, because there's just a lot there. And so I didn't really ask questions. So fast forward, right? But like we knew we were related to this Elias Howe. And again, the only reason why that name stuck with me is because we have his prototype, it has his name on it. So like I looked at it all my life. So here I am, fast forward like 5, 6 years ago, watching the History Channel, and I see this grave with this woman's last name. And I take a moment. And so I Google Elias Howe and if he's related to Elizabeth Howe. And I end up coming across this family tree that he's a direct descendant from her. And so I have this total revelation moment, right? Where I'm sitting there thinking, first of all, I didn't even know my family was American that long. Like I thought we were Canadian and then I don't know wherever we came from because my aunt, I'm a mutt. I am we're the strongest breed, but like you could throw a dart at a map and I'm from there. Like I did my ancestry just for my female line and they were like, "You're everything." Okay. That was fun. I didn't even know that many countries existed, to be perfectly honest. So so once again, right? Like we don't ask a lot of questions because we don't know. Everyone came from everywhere. So I'm watching this documentary, I'm putting this together, I'm having this total moment. I call my mom and I'm like, "Hey, is there any way that like great grandma would have potentially come from like Massachusetts?" She's like, "Probably." Like she didn't even know where she was born. And I'm like, "Okay, well, like I just found out this information that we're apparently related to one of the women who was hung at the Salem Witch Trials." And her reaction was so like, "Okay, what?"
It's kind of
I
a
was
big
like,
deal.
"Kinda." So, again, like, does this information pay my taxes or make me special? No, absolutely not. But for someone who doesn't know a lot about their own history, it was a big deal, right? Just to even know that we lived in America that long, even part of my lineage, let alone that we were part of this. Now, let's back all the way up to little teenage myself. I think I was 12 because it was like seventh or eighth grade in school when they taught about the Salem witch trials. So I can remember my outfit that I was wearing, Tommy. That's how clear this memory is. So I'm in class and they start teaching about the Salem witch trials and they get a bit through like the bulk of why we're teaching it and talking about it. And I've always really been interested in law and legal stuff. So anything with that would really like pique my interest, even when I was young. And they start talking about it and they give kind of the gist of like, this is kind of what happened. And I flipped. And I wasn't an unruly kid, but I was definitely outspoken. Um, I think you could tell that in my personality, right? So I stood up and started yelling Like I had a fit basically. And I told the teacher, I need to take a walk. And I had to literally go outside and just go like walk the track for a while, which isn't really fun, nor was it something that I normally did. But like that's how upset I was. I was so mad at 12 years old that this event had happened. I had no clue that I was related to it or anything. I was just mad that this happened, period.
Mhm.
And this wasn't even a matter of were these people really witches or not, like standing up for my own belief system. This was how in the world would you listen to a 9-year old through 11 and 13-year old and kill people as a result of the most ridiculous accusations and absurd proclamations, and you're killing people like that? To me, just I hit my limit
Yeah. Did you
at
know
12 years old.
at 12 years old that you was a witch, that was your going to be your path? I'm sure I've asked
I
you that before.
Yeah, I did. I was just starting to be more open with people about it.
Hmm.
You know, at that age, it's so weird when you're a teenager because you want to fit in, but at the same time, you're just coming into like your own individuality.
Yeah.
And so there's this like ebb and flow of like, I don't want people to judge me and oust me, but at the same time, like, this is who I am, and I'm actually going to stand up and be who I am. But again, you know, I live in a melting pot area, so nothing was super outrageous, right? If anything, it was like, oh, that's the girl who wears black eyeliner
Hmm. Yeah.
along with like 40 other girls. So not a big deal. So this is just kind of getting you to the beginning stages of understanding like my real how far back this goes for me of being passionate about not only what happened, but also making sure that this never happens again. Because
Hmm.
this was absolutely horrific what happened. So, for those of you who don't know, I'm not sure if it's taught in schools anymore. I have tons of nieces, nephews, and God's children, but I ask them what they learned in school, and they basically tell me nothing, and then they just want to go play a video game.
Yeah.
So,
Exactly how my
not
kids
getting
are.
a ton of info. So, so I just want to kind of educate a little bit about what it is exactly that happened. So, Salem Witch Trials started June 1692, again until like May 1693. They were a series of investigations and persecutions that caused 19 people to be convicted as witches and hung or killed in other various ways. There were multiple other people who were also suspects or accused, and they were jailed as well. So there were the 19 people who actually died, but there were many more who were sitting in jail for a good long while. One of them, by the way, was a 5-year-old girl.
5. That's
Mhm.
insane.
Yes, yes. She was in there. Oh, I'll get to that. Tommy, am I going to get through this without screaming? I don't know. We'll see.
You can scream. That's cool. That's wild. 5 years old. I mean, how can you?
She was in there because her mother was very poor. Okay. And in this village, most of the people in the village were Puritans. And I'll go into what Puritans are in a moment. But basically, they're like super duper hardcore Christians, right? And the sad part, though, is there were people in the township who were poor and they believed in this, right? Like they were Christian, but they didn't have enough land or money. And her mother's spouse, her husband, had passed away. So she's basically an unwed mother at this point, um, with a small child. And she has to go around begging everyone for food and wood, right? And these quote unquote Christian families with homes and food and maids and people to help them were basically sick of her because when people would turn her away and say, no, we're not giving you any food, or no, we don't have any spare wood, she would say, thanks so much for offering us in to get warm, right? Like, very Christian of you. And she would call them out, which is also part of the Puritan nature. They were not only super Christian, but they believed in being very public about shaming and being very public in admonishment of sin. So it wasn't like you had a quiet conversation with somebody and tried to hash things out quietly. It was very like, we're going to write this on your back and make you walk through the town and show everybody what you did. So this woman who was poor with this little child in tow would be very loud when she would say, thanks so much for offering me a speck of bread, or thanks so much for offering us to come in and warm our hands in front of your glorious fire. And in order to tell other people, like, you're not being truly Christian, you're not helping those in need. And people were fed up with it. And so they accused the mother of being a witch. Well, now you've got a 5-year-old on the loose through the town who's going to everyone's door, like, can I sleep here? Like, can I eat? Like, my mom's in jail. And then finally they were like, yeah, we got to get rid of the daughter too. So then they put the 5-year-old daughter in jail and accused her of being a witch.
Man.
Like I said, if I can get through this episode without screaming.
Yeah.
But I think that's an example of how ugly this was. And
because I looked at this might be wrong, but I looked at the population. There was only like 60,000 people at the time. Is that?
Oh yeah, there weren't that many people.
It's not a huge population of people.
No, and in Salem Township, there are only like 400 or 500 people.
Yeah.
So there's not a lot going on. And the major issue with this, and why it's brought up, but not only legally, but also morally, is basically what they did was, if you were accused of being a witch and you denied it, you died, you were hung, you were sentenced to death. If you admitted being a witch and you gave up somebody else as a witch, then you were allowed to live. You were spared. And this goes back to the puritanical beliefs. So the Puritans themselves, this is a fun story. So the Puritans themselves are this offshoot of people, right? Like I said, they're very devout Christians, and they're over there in England, and they basically feel like England is like the Wild West, right? It's ungodly. The Church of England was proclaimed by the king. They didn't believe in that. They wanted to go live off on their own. They felt that no one should be ruling them other than God and the Bible, and living by those means. So they wanted as far away from the monarchy as they could get, which is why they agreed to get on a boat and sail on over to the New World, right? Imagine like an Amish person, someone with no electricity, someone who lives strictly by, the word of God, a very pure lifestyle. Imagine them going to San Francisco, right? This is how these people thought of London. Like, London was just absurd and ungodly. It was terrible. So they could not wait to get on a boat and go over to the New World, which they did. And so when they get to the New World, they get barraged with, it's not as new and wonderful as everyone thought it was going to be. New England in itself, it is a bit like the UK. You have rocky coasts, right? But you have extreme weather. And we're talking like in the winters, I mean, it's snowing like 4 to 5 feet of snow. It's like that for months. In the summer, it's sweltering hot and it's humid. The land is very rocky. It's not super fertile, right? Like in England, you have the countryside, which it's really good, fertile land. You have to really hunt. And plus, it's a wild area. And so there's tons of trees. So you have to basically deforest the entire place in order to make a farm field. Then you have to figure out what's going to grow in the soil because it's by an ocean. Ocean brings salt. That does not really give the land a lot of nutrients. Salt actually really messes up the soil, which is why there's only like certain crops that will grow in seaside towns, right?
Mm-hmm.
So these people think they're coming to this new world, this utopia, being away from the monarchy. They get to live by their very pure beliefs. They're very into public shaming. They're very into making a spectacle of how good they are. And this is why they refer to each other as good or goody instead of each other's first names, right? So it's like Goody Howe instead of Elizabeth Howe, right? That's it's, some churches will say like, oh, it's a brother or a sister,
Mm-hmm.
or like they have other names. Well, like they called everyone good and goody. It got very confusing when I was
Yeah,
watching one documentary. I was like, who?
that's his name.
Exactly. Give me the last name. Somebody help me. So, and the other thing with the Puritans is, sex was not discussed. It
Mm-hmm.
again, very utilitarian. Like that was between a husband and a wife. It was private. No one ever talked about it. You weren't supposed to like it. You weren't supposed to think about it. All bodily desires were basically forced down because they were considered appetite of the devil.
They
So
they weren't even
eating,
allowed to dance. Is that right? That they weren't even allowed to dance. Like
oh,
dance was seen as a
no,
sin.
mhm, yeah.
Wow.
And even singing and like if sometimes you're doing chores, right, and kind of like sing a little song or
Hmm.
do a little dance or whatever, like having
Every
fun,
day.
that is absolutely, that's a no-no. No enjoyment whatsoever, basically,
Yeah.
pretty
Yeah.
much. And so as a result, you have a whole bunch of very repressed people.
Hmm.
But when you're an adult and you're repressing yourself, that's a conscious choice. When you're a child growing up in that, it's a lot harder because you're a child, you have these natural desires and you want to go have fun and you want to do things, but you can't because now you're of the devil, right? And so now we go into the politics of the time because again, New England living was a very hard existence. And let's not forget that, like, these people aren't native to that land. There were already people who were Native Americans,
Hmm.
right? Who were there. That was their home. And all of a sudden, these people come and they're like, okay, like we can be cool with you. And then the Puritan people were not super cool, basically. And so there was a lot of wars and fighting and a lot of fear, right? Because the natives were trying to reclaim their land. These settler people just think like, well, this is ours. We should stay here. There were a lot of wars between them, and there were a lot of really heinous acts on both ends. And so you had kids who were orphaned because one or both of their parents were killed in an attack. You had people who were dying left and right of different diseases and malnutrition because they weren't being fed properly. They're not used to the climate. They're getting sick, right? Like you had consumption, tuberculosis going rampant, and anything else under the sun because, again, they're not used to this really harsh climate. And you have to chop down trees in order to get wood. And let's face it, if you're not doing that like most of summer and fall, you're going to die halfway through winter, right? So there's a lot going on. On top of the fact, it's 1692, right? We don't
Hmm.
have penicillin. We barely know we need to wash our hands when we're doing surgery, right? We're not bathing. We're going in outhouses, which are basically porta potties in the ground, right? Which is disgusting. We have livestock that's in a new environment. So we don't know what it's interacting with. We've got mosquitoes and bugs that we're interacting with that people aren't used to. Plus, they're eating like the natural plants and their bodies aren't taking to it well. Add all of that stuff, and then add the fact that there's no mental health. No one is taking care of that aspect of anyone's life.
Mhm.
If you're sad, angry, having a moment, it's the devil trying to get a hold of your soul, basically. So everyone's repressing all of the emotions, all of the desires. Barely anybody has an outlet because you're all living on top of each other. And let's face it, like, parents aren't doing things to relieve each other when you got 8 kids in the bed, right?
Mhm.
So there's a lot going on, is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And on top of that, now you have politics, because these people have now been here for a generation or two in some instances. So there's this one particular family, and there's 3 brothers. 2 of the brothers were by one mom who died, and the third brother was by another mom who also passed away. Again, women were dying left and right in these days, especially in childbirth, because that was just rough. And the younger brother, by the mom who had more recently passed away, she came from a lot of money. And in that money, she also had an allotment of land. And by whatever law she was able to do this, in her will, all of the land that came to her and money bypassed her husband and his 2 other sons and went to her son only when he was of age. So the older 2 brothers are very resentful of this. So what do? They work with their dad and they basically start suing everybody in town in order to get land and money because they think they deserve more. Now, mind you, they're still a Puritan and they're still putting on airs that they're super duper Christian, but they're very much, they expect that people are going to do things for them. Well,
Mhm.
what starts happening is people are like, no, you don't deserve a handout. You don't deserve my stuff just because you think you got cheated because, this woman died and left everything to her son. So these people started suing back and it became very nasty. And a lot of people think like, oh, these Puritan people, they're so Christian and wonderful. Well, there's everyone suing everyone. People were fighting with neighbors because they would have fences put up in between their property lines, and people would let their livestock go and graze on other people's land. Well, they're eating their crops, right? So then they'd get mad and say, hey, keep your cows or your pigs or your goats or whatever it was, on your land and don't move my fence. And then they'd start suing each other, right?
Oh
For
man.
money, for food, or for this or for that. And this is how these accusations start. Okay. Have I bored you enough
See,
with all?
no, this is amazing. So this would create a lot of paranoia. You wouldn't. It would be a wild place to live. And I want to live in there now, but you wouldn't want to live there then.
Not back then.
Man.
Yeah, not back then. And the other thing we have to remember is there was a witch craze that had been going on for about 150, almost 200 years at this point. The book, The Witch's Hammer or the Malleus Maleficarum, came out in 1486. And this is what basically kicked off the witch trials over in Europe. And it started in Germany and then kind of radiated out from there.
Mhm.
And it was very easy for people to blame it on a witch. And again, you have a lot of paranoia. You've got a lot of people who have subversive reasons for wanting to accuse somebody else. And this already started over in Europe. So this is like already a thing. Now they were burning witches over there. They were also drowning them because, the old thing, well, if we throw her into the water with a whole bunch of rocks and she sinks, she wasn't a witch. But if she
That's crazy.
floats, yeah, yeah, wasn't the best of
That
times.
is that is so
Not at all.
wild.
And I know I'm about to drop a giant info bomb right now. But my husband is actually related to the person who wrote that book, The Witch's Hammer.
Wow. Wow,
Yeah,
man.
yeah.
So was I might be wrong here, but was he like a priest? Or was he a judge? What was he?
He was a priest. I'm
Oh,
putting
he
that in
was a
air
priest.
quotes.
Yeah.
So he's not a direct descendant because supposedly that man didn't have children.
Mhm.
Um, he had children. He was taking advantage of many a woman. We'll put it that way. Wasn't a great man. But one of the women who was actually burned at the stake put a curse on him and his lineage. And I do find it interesting that my husband and his brother, neither of them have kids. And my husband, he's even said it, I have not tried, but his entire life, every woman he's ever been in a relationship with has been a witch.
Wow.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And then he ends up with me. And I was like, I don't know what kind of karmic stuff we're about to work out. Apparently, like,
Let's go.
so yeah. So I
Wow.
actually I went in and asked Sarah, was her name, who had put the curse, and went in to talk to her to ask her, look, he's with me, like, look at the family, look at the things that they've done, and they've obviously not gone that direction. Like, would you be willing to relinquish it? And she basically kind of told me, like, I'm gonna think about it. So we check
So,
in when we can, but
so is this the spirit of that lady?
yes, yeah. And this was over in Scotland, I think. Can't remember. Yeah, yeah.
Wow.
It's a lot. Told you
Well,
this is going to be a weird episode.
so no, I love it. It's super. That guy. What was his name? Do you know his name? The guy that wrote that
There
book.
were two. Yeah, there were Heinrich Kramer and then the other guy.
Okay, and they're based in Germany. Is that where they were?
Yeah, that's where they came
Okay,
together,
yeah.
started. Yeah.
So this guy, he had, for whatever, he had a vendetta against witches, and was just he wrote this book that was just, you know,
It was a money-making scheme
yeah,
because he was not only getting paid by people from towns to come in and root out witches, he was getting paid from the book sales, but he was also being paid by churches who at that time had most of the money in order to come in and root out the quote unquote evil and the witches in these different towns. So, I mean, not only did he make a ton of money, but a lot of what people don't understand is in order to find out if especially a woman was a witch, they would have her stripped down naked because they have to look for quote unquote witch marks
yeah.
or extra nipples, which is considered a witch mark, by the way.
That's wild.
So in there's a show, um, and it says count the nipples. And that actually comes from the witch's hammer, which is you would have to count the number of nipples.
Wow.
I'm bringing my bird
We've got a
in.
new guest. For anyone that can't see, we now have a bird with us.
Yes, she decided she's hanging out. She's gonna help mom through this.
She's awesome. What's her name again, JJ? I forgot her name.
My baby love.
Baby Love.
Yeah,
That's it.
she's
She's so
cute.
cute, man. But she's now with us. Welcome, Baby Love. So this is why it spread. This might be wrong, but is this why the witch trial started in the UK? They were going off that book as well. Is that correct? So
Oh
what was?
yeah. So all of this started over in Europe and then it just spread like wildfire all through Europe.
Mhm.
And then started going to Eastern Europe and different countries. And then of course it spread on over to the New World because it was just it was a perfect time for this to happen because you had people who were already infighting about stupid petty things,
Mhm.
right? They wanted land, they wanted money, And there was jealousy and envy, but because they're Puritans and they're super Christian, they can't acknowledge that. So instead, they do all this surreptitious little stuff behind the scenes. And the easiest way to move somebody out of the way is to accuse them of being a witch. And in Europe, a lot of that was happening as well. So in little towns, they would have these people come in and they would accuse, and it was usually a local woman who was a widow, who was older, who had like a nice plot of land, a nice big home, lots of money that was left to her. And, you know, she's usually just kind and minding her own business, but someone wanted what wasn't theirs, wanted it the easy way. So they accused her of being a witch. And she's a little eccentric. Maybe she's a little older, right? Or, you know, she's standing her ground. Like, who are you? Why are you trying to count my nipples, weirdo?
Mhm.
And, you know, basically they're like, yep, she's a witch, let's get rid of her. And then someone else gets to swoop in and take her land and her stuff. And then the guy who does the accusing, who says, yeah, she's a witch, he gets paid too. So it's a racket, it's a money-making scheme. And this again is why this incenses me, because you have these people who are saying we're living by the word of God, we're being, you know, we're being Christian, we're pure of heart, and they're doing all of this ugly back stuff. And these two brothers in particular that I was talking about earlier, they end up hiring a pastor for the township of Salem. And the pastor came in thinking, you know, he's hot stuff. And part of the deal for him to come into this township and be the pastor was everyone in town had to cut wood and give it to him. And then people had to like donate money and stuff, right, in order to pay him. Well, the people of the town didn't want a pastor. They already had their own congregation. They didn't really need a pastor. They kind of had men within the society would get up and would talk about the Bible. They did Bible study every day. They don't need a pastor. Like, why are we cutting wood and paying this man to talk to us about the stuff that we've been doing just fine on our own? But these two brothers wanted it because they had greased palms with this guy. So what gets really, really interesting is the first accusers are the kids of the pastor, because he's mad that winter is coming and people aren't giving him the amount of wood that he feels he deserves. So instead of saying, hey, I'm your pastor, this is like part of my payment, you guys, you know, or chopping wood himself, he gets mad. And all of a sudden, isn't it interesting? His kids start accusing people of being witches. And when this happens, you have the governor who gets called in. And the governor comes in and he's like, what's going on? The pastor's like, hey, we've got witches, the devil's in Salem. These two brothers come and they back up the pastor and they're like, listen, we've got a tons of witchcraft. Look at these kids. They're acting crazy. We can't get them to stop. The doctor's saying there's witchcraft afflicting them. And everyone's like, okay. And then the governor basically was like, okay, we'll let you guys handle this in-house, do a trial, you know, do what you do, figure it out, weed out the witches, and like I'll be back in a couple months and see how things are going. And this is when things went nuts. So not only were the children of the pastor the accusers, the children of the two brothers who wanted everything from their younger brother and everyone else, their kids also start accusing people.
Mm.
Yeah.
And it was just
So,
his word against it. It was just, it was no, I
mhm.
mean, it's wild.
So let me tell you what the kids were accusing, because this is it's fun. So the kids were saying that my ancestor, Elizabeth, that Elizabeth was vexing them spectrally, meaning through the ether, right, without putting hands on them, by making their palms feel like they were being pinched. They would go into raucous fits where they would start screaming or rocking back and forth or just acting hysterical Or they would all start, like one girl would say something and the rest of them would all repeat it in unison. That's what typical 9 through 13-year-old girls do. We're annoying. I'm sorry, but we are at that age. You have kids, you know how delightful.
I've got a 12-year-old, so
You
I know.
understand.
I understand.
You get it. You get it. And that's not an knock to kids. I love children. I was one
Yeah.
myself, right? But at the same time, like we do annoying stuff.
Hmm.
But if you're taking that at the time because you have no medicine, there's no mental health, you've got all these other factors going on. I mean, isn't it interesting that the only kids afflicted are by the 3 people who have the most to gain by everyone that they start accusing?
Yeah.
So the first person that they accuse was named Bridget Bishop. And the really sad thing about Bridget is she was a Christian. She was actually kind of a midwife at one point. So she actually understood female reproductive issues, i.e., why women were dying in childbirth or having stillborn babies, um, postpartum, things like that. And I think she had potentially either some Irish descent or she knew about some of the older ways with herbs and healing. And so people would kind of go to her on the sly in order to ask things. Like there was one woman in particular who kept having stillborn babies. And Bridget basically walked by her and was like, listen, I could tell you what's going on. And Bridget explained to her, it's not you, like you're not the problem. Unfortunately, it's your husband. And what a lot of people don't remember is until the 1970s, when you got married, you had to have a blood test because different blood types, when you get together and you're trying to make a baby, if you're not compatible, it will miscarry or stillborn every time. And so what would happen is before, I think it was like the end of the 70s, before that, when you would go to get married, you would go to the doctor and get a blood test and a blood type. And if you weren't compatible, this was presented to the man in order to say, hey, do you still want to marry this woman because she's never going to be able to bear you children? Now, at the end of the 1970s, they created a medication that ended up helping that so that people with different blood types, the woman could actually keep the baby. It would bridge that gap, right, for that blood issue. But way back in 1692, they didn't even know about blood types. But there were some people who did. They started seeing certain signs. Hey, this family lineage doesn't seem to be able to procreate with this one, right? So there was a knowledge. And again, there weren't that many people. So it was kind of easy to figure out. And the other thing that's kind of sad that like no one really wants to talk about is there's probably a lot of inbreeding going on because everyone was cousins, right?
Yeah.
So you had a whole lot of real kissing cousins, which in some instances can be great, right? Because, okay, now we know we're the same blood type, we'll have babies. But in other instances, if people are too close of cousins, we know that there can be mental defects that occur and physical defects. And all you need is a couple babies being born with an extra extremity or mental issues, and then everyone's blaming it on witchcraft again. Because again, it's 1692.
Yeah.
Okay. So, poor Bridget Bishop basically is found guilty and hung because she has a nice home kind of on the outskirts of town, doesn't have a husband, right? She's ripe for the picking. We want that land. It's easy to accuse her. People are already a little suspicious because she's a woman and she knows things. So obviously she's a witch, right? And so they end up finding her guilty and they hang her. And she was the first hanging on June 10th. Oh, yeah. So there were 3 successive hanging days where they basically hung about 5 people each. And there were 13 more women, 5 men, all different stations of life. These were poor people to people who had a lot, all across the map that were accused, went through these trials. Some of the trials took a really long time. because there were people in town who would actually pipe up and say, no, this isn't true. Like, stop. And then they'd have all the kids basically repeat after each other in court. So with my relative Elizabeth, after Bridget's trial happens and she's sentenced to be hung, because she's not going to admit to being a witch, because she's not, right? So she's not going to admit to anything. Like, what are you people talking about? This is ridiculous. And they're like, well, if you won't admit it, we're going to kill you. But if you'd admit it and call someone else out, like, we'd let you go. And she's like, no, I'm not going to lie. So off to death we go. So at the end of the trial, as everyone's kind of walking out, and a lot of people are in shock that this just happened, right? Because they kind of see the writing on the wall and they're starting to figure out, like, we're taking the word of a 9-year-old. My relative Elizabeth says out loud, we're going to listen to the words of a 9-year-old. These are children. They're doing childish acts, and we're putting someone to death because of children. Well, not only did the children hear it, but the children's parents heard her say it. And my relative, of course, the one who speaks it, because
Yes.
all I'm is yammering on, right? I come from a line of very strong women. She already kind of had some eyeballs on her. So she was 57 at the time. She was older, which, you know, again, 1692, right? Mortality rates aren't great. But I mean, there's a man in town who was in his 90s. So some people lived a good while. They just came from hardy stock. But with Elizabeth, not only was she outspoken, but months before, she had Rose going back and forth with her neighbors. So her neighbors and her already got a little testy. Now, her husband went blind when he was 50. And as a result, she had to step up and take care of a lot of things that women didn't normally do in that society, especially in puritanical society, right? Like, men's work was men's work, women's work was women's work. It was very divided. But she kind of had to take care of both, right? Because he went blind. She was very hardworking, very kind, very much a godly woman, very Christian. And she had a lot of responsibility. She had 6 kids as well. So she's got 6 kids and a blind husband. She's got an entire big house. She had a larger house in town and a lot of land. So she is the one telling the maids and the people helping what to do, not the husband. People automatically are looking at her like, we don't like that, right? A woman who's mouthy and power, she's got her own mind. So she's speaking up. Now, the other thing is she would have to walk her husband to the men's meetings and would have to be there to guide him around. So she was privy to and hearing things that only the men were talking about. And as a result, all right. So sorry about that. We apparently had a technical malfunction.
We froze for a second there. I don't know what happened there.
Hopefully the spirits of beyond are not upset.
Yeah.
But again, as a result of her having a blind husband, having a lot of responsibility, being able to go to these meetings that were for males only, she was bearing witness to a lot of information and a lot of things that made the men nervous, but it also made the women nervous, but also curious. And because she was a good Christian woman, she's like, no, I'm not going to gossip or speak out of turn. Like, what happened at the men's meeting happened. Like, I'm only there to make sure my husband can get home and get around. So she wasn't a gossip. She really, really was a hardworking, godly woman. So when her neighbor girl, who was 10, accused her, a 10-year-old. Again, They would constantly have their livestock going on her property, eating her crops. She's telling the parents, you need to get your livestock off my property. I erected fences. You keep moving the fences and letting your, stuff eat my stuff. Like, go grow your own stuff. And so as a result, the neighbor girl basically hears her parents complaining about Elizabeth. And all of a sudden, the neighbor girl, who's 10, says, oh, Elizabeth is vexing me. She's pinching my hand spectrally. Okay. Like, you and I are thinking like, okay, this is ridiculous, right? But back then it was like, oh no, clutch the pearls and the hat and all the things, right? This is the one that really got me though. Another neighbor of hers who wanted her land. He was trying to buy her out and she kept saying no. And again, she had 6 kids, right? So like that land was definitely going to other people. He wasn't going to get it. So they had a whole fight again about him moving her fences and his livestock eating her crops. And they had some terse words. So she basically told him, take your cow on back to your pasture, like, get off my land, off you go. So afterwards, she walks back into the house and he says that when she slammed the door going back into her home, his cow jumped 4 feet in the air and then collapsed and died, right? Well, first of all, you and I both know a cow is not jumping 4 feet into the air.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? It's just, it's not. If a cow jumps 4 feet in the air, it had to have had a good running start. So even just the mental thought of all of this is so absurd to us today. But when Elizabeth basically is accused of by the neighbor girl of pinching her hand spectrally, Elizabeth says, I would not touch a dog the way that she accuses me of touching her. Meaning this woman was so kind that she wouldn't pinch a dog, let alone a human girl.
Yeah.
Right? Like, this is how nice she is. So, you got these kids telling these absurd stories. And I mean, something pinching your hand. I don't know if you know what stinging nettle is, but it's this plant that's just awful.
Yeah.
And, it touches your skin. You feel like you have a paper, right? It could have been that these kids touched. It could have been that like the kids had diabetes and neuropathy for all we know, right? They were malnourished, most of them. So, and just the accusations were absolutely ridiculous. So they have Elizabeth go to court for her trial. They put her in jail, right? Mind you, her husband's blind at home with the 6 kids, screaming from the rafters, like, my wife is not a witch. And they were like, well, you better pipe down, buddy, because otherwise we're going to say you're a witch. So now he has to shut up because, again, now he's being threatened. So as she's in court, the accuser's saying that she is, while she's sitting there on trial, that she's spectrally harassing them. She's causing their hands to burn. They feel like they're being pinched, and that their evidence that she was a witch was they would have the kids walk over and touch her. And when the kids would touch her physically, the sensations would stop. That means she's a witch. People. So then they force her to get naked multiple times, not just once, many times, force her to get naked. Now, you and I, okay, you understand, right? Like, okay, if you go to jail or something, you have to get naked. And usually there's people of the same gender, right, who are there. And it's not fun. No one wants to do it, right? But like, okay, this is in a courtroom in front of males and females. This is a puritanical Christian woman. They do not show their hair down. They wear bonnets over their hair because showing your hair is too temptuous. So to be stripped down naked as a 57-year-old woman
Wow.
and have two other women plus multiple men all staring at you. And these women are like going everywhere because they're looking for witch marks, which again are moles or nipples, um, in front of everyone. So this is the absolute worst day that you could have. This is shameful. It's embarrassing. It is absolutely awful. I mean, and she is just taking it like a champ. And all she has to say is, yes, I'm a witch, and call someone else out. And she would have been spared. And she knew that by this point. Okay.
And
Because,
would they let them just carry on with their lives if that was the case? Or do they go to
well, so the one person who did confess was a girl named Tituba. And Tituba actually came from Barbados. So she was a Caribbean girl. She was basically brought over as a servant, right? Which is a nice way to say slave. Um, and Tituba was young. She was with this family from like when she was like 6 or 7 years old, right? And they moved from the Caribbean up to Massachusetts area. So Tituba was taking care of this other family's kids, and she would regale them with stories because she's an island girl, right? From the Caribbean, from Barbados. And so you tell scary stories about witchcraft and things like that. And the kids would get all excited. And, I was a nanny at one point. Like, that's what you do. You make the kids excited and
yeah, it's
they get
fun.
happy and you tell them stories.
Hmm.
Well, I think she was 13 or 15 when she was accused. And she confessed. She said, yeah, fine, I'm a witch. Right? Because like she had told enough stories. She looks different than everyone else. If you guys get it, she had more melanin. Um, she comes from the islands. She's just thinking, fine, like if I admit it, I'm scared. So she admits it and then has to call somebody else out, which she does to an extent, and they let her live. But she's still in jail, but they let her live.
Oh, you have to go to
Yeah.
jail still.
Oh, everyone's in jail. The minute you're accused, you go to jail and you sit in jail until your trial. You don't get to go home out on bail because then you're doing your witchery. So
Hmm.
you're sitting in jail with a whole bunch of women and men where you're all doing your number ones and twos in a corner. They don't have a chamber pot even. And everyone is iron shackled to the wall. Okay.
Wow.
That's, yeah, because again, the iron shackles are supposed to prevent
Mhm.
you from
So
doing the witchcraft.
so even though she's admitted to it and that spared her life, she still has to stay in jail.
She's in jail until the whole trial ends when the governor steps in. Um, so the governor, basically what ends up happening, I'll fast forward. So Elizabeth ends up being found guilty. She's hung with 5 other people on July 19th, which is why we're releasing this on the day that we are in honor of her, which again, thank you, Tommy, for allowing me to honor her.
Thank you.
In Tituba's case, she's basically stuck in jail, right? I mean, the only positive thing is like she's not having to work her rear end off every day for the family that she usually lived with, but she's sitting in jail. What ends this whole trial is the governor comes back for like a little check in, right? Because again, he doesn't live there, like he lives elsewhere. So he comes back in, hey, just checking in, like, how's the trial going? They're like, hey, we've hung 19 people. And he's like, oh, okay, wow. And then one of the townspeople accused his wife of being a witch, the governor's wife.
Oh boy.
Yeah. At this moment, he flips, you know what? And he was like, all of this is a sham. You people are absurd. I see what you're trying to do now. Stop everything. And that's when basically everything takes a hard stop and all the trials end. But that's also when people start getting found out. And then it was like, let's deny everything, burn everything. And that's when they start trying to take all the transcripts. Thank God we have the survivors who kept some stuff. They hid it in mattresses, they hid it in chairs, they hid it in
Wow.
sties and things like that, because they were coming through as the government, because they knew they were going to be in deep, you know what, if this came out. And the people who had died, their families could sue the monarchy saying, you let this happen on your watch, and
Yeah.
get money. And so everyone's like, oh my God, we cannot let anybody know. Bridget, the first woman who was hung, one of her accusers was a man in town who had a lewd dream about her. She was pretty, right?
He had the dream.
He had a lewd dream about her, and he accused her of being a witch because she obviously is coming to him in his dreams and she's trying to tempt him. Yes. So if you were too pretty, if you had something that someone else wanted, if you were too smart, if you were too mouthy or too intelligent, obviously you're a witch. And there was one man that I want to give a special shout out to, Giles Corey. He was the one who had the stones piled on him. He was basically crushed to death. Over the course of 3.5 days, they piled a whole bunch of stones on him.
Oh,
he was accused of being a witch, and he said, bring on the stones. And what ended up killing him is when they said, we'll take the stones off. All you have to do is admit that you're a witch. And he said, give me one more. Now, he is actually a direct relative of Alan Bishop, and he's the podcaster from If You Have Ghosts, You Have Everything podcast. I had wanted him to do this with me tonight so we could both talk about our ancestors. Unfortunately, he was busy with the prior engagement, but I would love you two to get together and do a show together.
That'd be amazing. 100%. Yeah.
Yeah. So wild, right? Wild. I mean, we've got 9, 10, 11-year-olds just making ridiculous accusations. And some of them could have had mental illness issues, but for the most part, they were making it up. And my bird agrees.
Yeah. So they were being killed in terrible ways as well, hung on trees, stoned, as you just said. But man,
Giles was the only one who did the stone method.
Okay.
The majority of them were hung, and they were like 5 at a time. And in front of all the townsfolk, people were coming out in order to watch this. Some people watching this in horror, some people were watching this with glee because they knew, oh, good, we just got so and so out of the way. We could take all of their stuff. It's really, really awful, you know. And you also are sitting there watching this thinking, who's next?
Yeah.
Right? Because I mean, you're letting these kids run rampant.
Yeah, it's just all word of mouth. Anyone can say anything.
And that's why they tried to cover everything up. Honestly, Tommy, this was a coordinated money and land grab by the accusers. Their kids were the accusers, and there are a few records that state that every time the parents basically would come home with new information, all of a sudden that night or the next day, the kids would come up with a new accusation for somebody. So it's very, you know, if you smell a rat, right?
And they're killing people. Like, this is murder. Because And is this why it's quite difficult when you look into this subject? Why it's so hard to track 100% the truth? Because it was just destroyed, and we're just going off evidence of the families.
Well, you know, there are still complete documentations of the trials of certain people, and then there's other ones that you have to read, like someone's diary and things like that. But again, when this was all shut down by the governor, And the people who were responsible, the pastor and the two older brothers, got found out and kind of called on the carpet. That's when they went through and tried to burn all the documentation and make it, quote unquote, go away, because they realized how badly they messed up. And not only that, they realized, oh God, like people are going to see right through what just happened. So, a couple conspiracy theories though with this, and then I promise I'm going to end with something nice, because I do have some nice stories about all of this.
This is so interesting. I find this so fascinating. I know it's a horrible time in history. What I find wild as well is really it's not really that long ago. Like it's only like 3 generations ago, really, 3 or 4 generations ago, really. Like it's not
1692, Tommy? How old are your generation?
My maths is shocking. So what should we say, like 5 or 6 generations ago?
9 or 10, dear.
9 or 10. Okay, 9 or 10. I wasn't that far out.
But it wasn't like 3 or 4. I'll do things different over in England.
It's not too long ago, really, when we think about it. That's what I find wild as well.
That America isn't even that old.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
We were started in 1776 when we broke off from the monarchy. So,
it's wild.
In history wise, this wasn't a super long time ago.
Yeah.
But the reason why this is so important to talk about currently is because it's starting to happen again.
Yeah. Yeah.
I will go on a very short little soapbox rant. Okay. And I won't use names, so I don't want anyone getting sued. But you know who you are.
Yeah, I don't need to get sued, JJ.
I'm working on it. Yeah. Okay. So there are some very big churches with some very big and notable pastors who make a lot of money and are very visible. We'll put it that way. A few of them have been accused by multiple women of sexual assault. And also, just regular, like, why are you trying to hit on me? You're literally the pastor and you're married. You're talking to everyone about being a good husband and you're trying to get in my pants. Like, I don't understand. So when these women came forward with these accusations, the pastors, there's a few of them, very publicly doxed these women and called them witches.
Wow.
So not only did he call them witches, but he put their names, addresses, and phone numbers out to the public. Now, when I say they're very visible pastors, I mean they have a huge online presence as well as a physical presence, like, mega churches, right? You can go there, but you can also watch them, stream them, whatever. And this has gone viral on the internet. So some people will know who I'm talking about. Some people won't. That's fine. Google it. Use the Googler for the thing. And you have that happening in a modern day Christian church. Okay.
That's wild.
You have an ex-president of the United States saying that everything is a witch hunt against him.
Yeah.
I take a little bit of offense to that. When you really did the crime and you want to say that people looking at you because you did a crime is a witch hunt, you kind of might need to re-listen to history, because a witch hunt is when you are going after people and not allowing them or giving them the ability to defend themselves properly, because you gain something from them going away, right? That's not how our law works in America. But there are other countries today, currently, again, use the Google, that are having people who are being hung, being publicly killed, stoned to death for being witches.
Still
There are
today.
still today. It is extremely sad. There are people who, if you are Christian, you're automatically deemed a heretic and you're killed. Yes. And there are certain places where if you're another religion, right, you're automatically killed.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, we have people who are part of the LGBTQIA plus community. In certain countries, they're not able to exist. If you're found out, you are killed.
Mm-hmm.
This is still happening today. It's 2024. So when I hear people getting mad about small, petty little things, and things like this are still happening in the world, that is what not only scares me, but really incenses me.
Mm-hmm.
Because these are the important things that we should be dealing with as a society.
Yeah.
These are the things that we should be talking about and making sure these don't happen again. If you put someone in a position where you say, if you don't admit to whatever we're accusing you of, we're going to kill you. But if you admit it and then implicate somebody else, we'll let you live, but miserably.
Mm-hmm.
You know, what do? You're backing people into a corner. In my country, that's called entrapment. It's against the law.
Yeah.
So, you know, again, it's a hot button issue for me because there still are people who this is happening to in one shape or form. I believe in religious freedom. I believe in spiritual freedom. And this is why I try not to force my ideals on anyone else. And I try to respect other people's beliefs, even if they're adverse to mine or opposite to mine. Doesn't matter. You still have every right to believe and think the way that you want to. That's fine. That's no business of mine, unless you're directly trying to hurt me. Like, that's a whole different thing, right? But like,
Mm-hmm.
if you're just existing in the world and you're different or whatever, I can either learn more about you and try to understand you, or I just stay away from you. But that doesn't mean I wish you ill will.
Mm-hmm.
And what really upsets me is when people say, oh, I'm a Christian and I follow the Bible, and then they do everything the exact opposite. The hypocrisy is what gets me. And to be honest, I understand why Jesus went into the temple and flipped over the table, because of the hypocrites. So
Mm-hmm.
I get it. I have my moments. I'm still human. Like, you could be spiritual and get angry. Like, it's a thing, right? And then I calm myself down and I say, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And I let it go, because everyone's where they're supposed to be. And stuff like this has happened in the past. And I would hope that as a society, we would have learned from this so that it doesn't happen again. But unfortunately, it seems to be making a resurgence. And that's scary. It's
It's
not
scary.
only scary for me because of my beliefs, it's scary for everyone.
Mm-hmm. History has a nasty way of repeating itself, and
Mm.
it and that is a scary thought, because
Yeah,
yeah,
because it didn't go so great
no, exactly, and we don't
first
learn.
couple times.
People don't learn, and it's yeah. I mean, it's
They
wild.
don't. They don't. And it's sad. But I want to lighten it up just a little bit. I feel like I went down like a very da da da.
Let's go.
I have
Long
to
as I
look at
don't,
like
long as I
chicken
don't get
videos
sued,
after
it's
this.
cool.
So, you know, this was the first government cover up ever
Mm-hmm.
in America, right?
First of
And
many. First of
well,
many.
yeah, it definitely was a kickstart, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, we have a couple other theories that go into what exactly happened that I wanted to bring up. So, obviously, we have that, you know, it's a coordinated money and land grab, right? By the accusers. They put their kids up to it, they told their kids what to say, and they got land, they got money, they stopped some lawsuits from happening. It was all led by jealousy, envy, and expectant and petulant thoughts, wicked hearts that harmed the innocent. And that's really important because, again, the people accusing was the pastor and the two men that hired him.
Yeah.
So, but, you know, I had talked before about potential of inbreeding and that it can cause mental health issues, but it can also cause seizures. And back then, when people had seizures, they were thought to have been afflicted by the devil. There were a lot of people during the witch trials in Europe and in America and everywhere else that they ended up having them that simply had epilepsy.
Mm-hmm.
And people didn't understand it. And so they thought they're either bewitched or they thought that they were a witch, right? So that's also really sad. Thankfully, we've come a long way with medicine so that there's ways to, diagnose that and detect it and treat it. But it is sad. The other thing, though, and this has been talked about a few times, but I find this so fascinating because if this was part of the case, holy moly, there was a really, really bad winter that happened before this all kicked off, right? Because again, this all kind of kicked off in May. So they're just coming into spring, right? Like the snow is finally melting. But they had a really hard winter. And not only was there a lot of snow, but there was a lot of rain late into the spring. Well, they grew a lot of wheat. And when wheat has wetness, i.e., rain, there's this fungus that grows on it. And it's a purple fungus. Jimi Hendrix wrote a song about it called Purple Haze. It's LSD, ergot.
Oh.
So if some of this wheat with this fungus had gotten into the tills and people were using it in their breads and all the things they were making, everyone was basically microdosed
Yeah.
in the town, which is interesting because when you think about when the harvests would be, right, for certain things, if in fact that was the case, especially some of the stuff stored in silos, if that fungus had gotten in there because, it was a really wet winter and like storms, right, had ripped through, and this fungus starts growing in there and they're eating even a little bit of it, they're getting microdosed. It might explain why some of the kids, because again, they're smaller, right? So therefore, a little on them is going to go a longer way than it is on an adult. An adult might be like, oh, I feel kind of weird today. But a
Mm-hmm.
kid's going to be like, I'm seeing colors and
Yeah.
hearing sounds and
Yeah.
tasting colors and sounds. So that is something that has been talked about, that there is a potential that some of what was happening, like the weird behavior, especially with the kids and some of the adults, was in a way real because there is a potential that they got some of this ergot. So,
Interesting.
it's, do I know if it's true? No, but
It's a
it's interesting.
possibility. Yeah. It's a possibility.
Yeah.
And you think for people that are living as Puritans, they don't dance, they don't sing, they don't do any of that stuff, to be experiencing that and to be possibly hallucinating and things like that, that would really change your mindset. And you'd be like, well, what is going on?
Well, and also hallucinogens, just like, alcohol and anything else,
Hmm.
it lowers your inhibitions. So that rigidity that they had all put on, if all of a
Yeah.
sudden you're being microdosed, all of the, especially for kids, right, who just really want to go run and yell and scream and laugh and be kids, all of a sudden, like, they're going to do whatever because all those inhibitions are being taken away.
Yeah.
So, do I know if it's true? No, but it's one of those theories that I was like, I would like to bring it up in case that was maybe the case. And it
Yeah.
also could have happened over in Europe too with certain people. There were some towns that, during some of those trials over in Europe, there were some things that were happening in some towns that were documented that were weird, that
Hmm.
do make me wonder if, like, by accident someone grew a magic mushroom or something like that,
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
100%. And especially as well, if they've had a rough winter as well, like already
yeah.
emotions are high. You've had a tough winter. You've probably not
Mhm.
eaten like you wanted to, and that would mess with your mind as well. So
Running
that,
low on wood, you're hungry, you're tired, you're cold,
yeah,
right? Yeah. So the real nasty evil folks were the ones doing the accusing, as another conspiracy. There was a show actually called Salem, and I watched the first season. I absolutely loved it. It's very dark. I'm not gonna lie. Like, it's a little hard to watch because it is very dark. But basically, the whole premise of the show is the ones doing the accusing were actually the real witches and devil worshippers, and that they were
interesting.
doing it deliberately to get out of the way the real pure people so that they could manipulate the town and do whatever it is that they wanted.
Wow.
Conspiracy theory, absolutely. Reality, I don't think so. But
Hmm.
it's an interesting, I mean, it's a great show, don't get me wrong.
Yeah, yeah.
Dream it. I recommend. I think it's on Hulu.
I'll check that out.
The
Not,
CW made it. And so, like, at first I thought, oh, is this going to be like Teeny Bopper? But the CW also made Supernatural, and that was a really good show.
yeah.
So,
My mother-in-law
CW
loved
surprises me.
Supernatural.
Oh, she's
So,
got to watch Roswell. Tell her to watch Roswell.
yeah, I'll let her know. That's
That's
not
the
that
new one.
not that it matters, but do we know if any of the witches that were executed were any of them actually witches?
No,
They
that's the
weren't.
really, really sad part. None of them were witches. Probably the closest one that, like, modern day might be considered a witch would be Bridget. But again, that's only because she knew plant medicine and
Hmm.
she, understood female reproduction. Again, she knew things. Women weren't allowed to be smart. We weren't allowed
Yeah,
to know things. But women could do arithmetic. She's a witch.
yeah,
Oh, yeah,
man.
yeah. So, if I've taught you anything today, it's that people used to really count people's nipples to determine if they were a witch.
Wild. And when it like skin tags as well, skin tags, moles,
Skin
nipples,
tags, moles, those were
anything,
all considered nipples because a
birthmarks.
mole, well, it had to be a raised birthmark because remember, it had to be, excuse me for saying this. I cannot believe I'm saying this out loud. It had to be a teat for the devil to suckle. Yes.
Man.
I'm sorry, Mom.
Wild.
Yeah. So I do want to end with a good story, with a positive story of all of this, because I know there's just like a lot of doom and gloom and all of this, right? But here's something really, really sweet and awesome that ended up happening. So, like I said, it wasn't that long ago that I found this information out. And again, does it make me special or pay my bills? Absolutely not. Is it interesting for me to know like something about my family lineage? Yes, absolutely. Right. So I have someone contact me and they're like, hey, could you do a quick check in on me and just see? I'm like, absolutely, no problem. So, what I normally do is we set these up and I say, okay, just give me like a 5-minute window when you're going to be sitting down, not doing anything because I can't have you driving or anything because my energy's strong when I pop over. And I will check in and then I'll email you and I'll tell you all the things. And I'd only corresponded with this person via email at this point. Okay. All I knew is that their name was Riss. That's it. That's all I knew. So, so I come to the allotted time, I pop over, and I basically see like a still shot of someone kind of sitting on the ground, kind of like in a half leaning position. And that's it. Like nothing. I see no energy. I don't see anything moving. I'm like, what? This is so weird. So I emailed the person back. I'm like, I'm really sorry to bug you. Like normally I'm in and I'm out, but like, is this you? And they're like, yeah, that's me. But And I'm like, do you have like protections or blockages up? They're like, no. And I'm like, listen, I'm really sorry, but can we get on the phone? Because I cannot figure out why I can't see anything. And they're like, okay. So I do all my phone calls to the internet, right? Because it saves it's cheaper, it keeps your anonymity, right? So we do it through Instagram Messenger. And I'm like, oh, go ahead, add me on Instagram and then just message me and we'll do it through there. And so they add me on Instagram and send me a message. And as I'm going to call them, you know how on the message it'll show you the person's name?
Mm-hmm.
I look at the name and they have Howe in their last name. And I'm like, oh, that's weird, right? So we get on the phone. I'm like, hi, Larissa, it's JJ. Oh, hi. And I'm like, okay, if you don't mind, can I ask you a question really quick before? Are you a Howe by blood? And she's like, yeah, I am actually. And I'm like, I got news for you. She's like, what's that? I'm like, you're my cousin.
Wow.
So out of absolute nowheresville, right? Me having this weird experience where I'm not able to like see how I normally see
Mm-hmm.
led to me getting her on social media, which again, we weren't before. It had just been through email. And I end up finding out she's technically a cousin of mine. So, we both kind of have this moment. I'm like, wow, this is so cool. Because again, I don't know any of my family on that lineage. I have one relative that's alive. It's from that line. That's that, or sorry, three four. Okay, yeah, you had a kid. Four blood relatives from that line. I've seen them maybe 5 times my entire life.
Wow.
Yeah. So like I don't really know anybody, right? Of that part of my family. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm excited. I'm like, I don't care if you're like 8 generations away. Like that's super cool, right?
Family, yeah.
So then I let her know, like, hey, did you know that we're related to someone who was actually hung at the Salem Witch Trials? She's like, no. Like, okay, well, don't freak out, but we were. And the guy who invented the sewing machine, super cool, yay, right? So I end up jumping over, and all of a sudden I could see everything, like my normal thing, right? So I do my normal thing. We have a great conversation, and she is one of the loveliest people I have ever met, and I mean that truly. She's just lovely. Like how there's some people who are nice or what. She's just lovely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I adore her. And she was on your show. She
Yes.
was episode
Awesome.
48.
Yeah. Awesome episode. Yeah.
Bigfoot in my bedroom.
Yeah.
And shout out to you, Larissa, my cousin.
That's awesome. Larissa
I
is
know,
lovely.
I
I had a
know.
great
So,
conversation with her.
she really is lovely. And, you know, like I said, we're probably like 8 generations apart, or who knows? I don't even
Family's
know.
family.
Like,
Yeah.
but at the same time, like me only knowing 4 people in my family on that side, to meet someone who I meet, especially through spiritual work, like something that's near and close to my heart, in
Yeah.
such a random way, that was so awesome to
That
me.
is cool.
Like, and then finding out Alan from the podcast, If You Have Ghosts, You Have Everything, to find out, hey, and my family, because they both lived in Salem Township, there weren't that many people, right? We're technically cousins as
Yeah.
well. And he was one as well. When I first heard him, Eric from Uncomfortable interviewed him. He found him. And I heard him the first time. Within 5 minutes of hearing him speak, I thought, this guy's like a brother to me. And if I saw him, I would say, hello, brother, and he would understand what I meant. And I was like, that's kind of weird, right? And later I end up getting to talk to him. And same with you. You guys,
Yeah.
you're
You
just like
just,
my brother.
yeah.
Like I love you and I adore you, and you're just wonderful people. And so it's really, really wonderful. And I know the average person might not understand this, but again, you got to think, like, I know 4 people I'm related to, and now I know 6. So
That's
it's
awesome.
cool.
That is awesome.
It is. So you
And
got questions for me, Tommy,
and
after I just
it's
like
so
gave you the
interesting.
encyclopedia of life.
No, you've super interesting, fascinating. So as I say, this is a subject that has fascinated me for years. So to hear it in that much detail, I understand it a lot more now. And
Good.
it's not the hocus pocus. Obviously, everyone loves hocus pocus. It's not that. It's very dark, and it was a horrible time. And as you say, we don't want anything like that happening again. I know it is still happening in some places in the world, which is crazy. Um,
Hmm.
but yeah, I find it very. It's wild knowing you to know that you go back to that lineage. Like that is a part of your journey as well, which is wild. That you.
Yeah. So, you know, a shout out to another friend of mine. I just remember this one. I I've been a part of a lot of like little spiritual groups, right? Like people get together, right? We talk about spiritual stuff or we work on healing stuff, different things. And one of them, we call ourselves the Ladies of Light, right? So, and we're just seven women who ended up finding each other very randomly through this little class that we took. And we all clicked and we get together and we share stuff about our life and we support each other and we offer healing work for each other if we need it or prayers for each other's family. You know, it's not like an exclusive club. It's just like a group, right? Of friends. And so this is God, this is actually before I found out that I from the History Channel thing. So I walk in, I'm sitting down, and one of the women looks at me and she goes, "Would you like some healing work?" I'm like, "Sure." And I go, "Go ahead, tune in. What do you think?" And she's like, "I don't know how to say this, but I see this noose around your neck, and it's why you keep losing your voice." Now, what's really interesting is I had had an issue for a couple years where I would randomly lose my voice. There was no rhyme or reason. I went to the specialist for it. I had the snake camera thing go down. Oh, that was horrible. And your nose, down your throat. Oh, don't recommend. But like they checked everything. And he was like, "Your vocal cords are fine. Like, I can't even figure out why this is happening." And it was intermittent. Like it made no sense. I could talk for 2 days straight and I'd have a voice, and then suddenly it would just go, like on a dime. It would just go. And so she looks at me and she's like, "I see this noose around your neck, and I feel like that's related to why you keep having your voice go out." And I'm like, "A noose?" So I end up going within and I go back to this past life where unfortunately I was killed for being a witch. And what ended up happening is at first they hung me, but for whatever reason, my neck didn't break and I didn't die. So then I'm definitely a witch at this point, right? So what they did, but it broke something in my back. Um, and so they threw me in the water for me to drown. But I had hit a rock on my chest and it propped my face up just enough that I could get air.
Oh man.
So I didn't drown from that. So when they go to pull my body out, I'm still alive. Well, now I'm definitely a witch, right? Because I've survived hanging and drowning. And so then they burn. Um, which is
Whoa.
interesting because I've always had a weird thing about fire. Um, I respect fire. I just don't want to be too close to it. So none of that's shocking. I mean, it's horrible, right? And it happened,
Where
but
was that? Do you know what part of the world you was
I'm
in when that happened?
I'm pretty sure it was somewhere in I want to say closer to Eastern Europe, just because of the features that I had that I
Hmm.
could see at the time. But it was during the witch crazes, during all that.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking, oh, that noose around my neck must be because of this past life. And it makes sense why I kind of like to stay hidden, right? because obviously it didn't go so well for me before, right? Um, so as a result, like that's why I'm very careful who I talk to about this stuff, etc. And again, this is before I had a YouTube, so like, still I don't really show my face that much. So we do work in order to remove it, and the voice stuff isn't that much of an issue anymore. To be honest, like the healing really did work. And then I find out about this, and then finding out that she was hung. And there's a part of me that wonders if not only my past life, but also that being in the DNA, right? If that also made me a little bit afraid to
Mhm.
talk and be open about this stuff because, yeah, it didn't go so well for her and she really wasn't a witch, right? So,
Yeah.
yeah. But, my final parting question, thought, whatever you want to call it, is why are we so afraid of witches and instead not afraid of the ones who are accusing, burning, hanging, killing
Hmm.
the witches?
For sure. Because they're the ones that were accusing and killing people that they knew were innocent, letting people die, letting people be tortured. They were the evil ones. Like they were. How can you do that? How could you do that? So
Yeah.
they're the ones to be scared of. You're right,
Yeah.
man. Well, thankfully, I mean, at least where we are in the world, it's it's a normal thing now. I mean, not. Do you
It
still find
is.
that you get pushback
You
or
know,
anything like that?
I don't in my area, but again, I'm in California. I live in a melting pot. There's so many different cultures and religions, and we're all so tolerant and used to each other that, I walk down the street with the shirt that says, witch on it, literally,
Hmm.
and no one bats an eye. I'll have people who will come up and be like, hi, sister, or I'll have people who, no one really even gives me dirty looks, to be perfectly honest. But I do know that there are people out there in my country, maybe not close to where I live, but in my country who are scared of people like me or who would give me dirty looks or, who would come up and say something nasty to me. Maybe not me personally, because I kind of radiate an energy that says
Yeah.
just don't. Um, and I'm also prepared, at that point. Like if someone wants to come up to me and quote scripture, I have no problem. I'll quote it right on back.
Hmm.
So, if you want to go, don't forget, I also am a minister. I studied the Bible. I went to seminary. So, you
Hmm.
know, I do know what I'm talking about. I was raised in a Christian home. It was just a Christian metaphysical home. I don't call myself a Christian for numerous reasons, also because it's a slight. Um, but that doesn't mean that I don't still read the Bible. I do all the time. And it doesn't mean that I don't believe in Christ and try to follow in his footsteps. I have a friend who's a pastor who did an amazing sermon one day on calling yourself a Christian if you're not truly following in Christ's footsteps and how that's true hypocrisy and abomination. It's still to this day my favorite sermon that he's ever given. And I hope to interview him actually one day because I want him to talk about that.
Yeah.
It made such an impact on me that from that day forward, I was like, yeah, I'm not calling myself a Christian. Because if I'm not able to measure up to that 100%,
Yeah.
I got no business doing that. But,
Interesting.
enough about me.
No, it's super interesting. JJ, you've fascinating stuff tonight. Super. You've made it a lot clearer for me. So
Good.
thank you.
I'm very grateful to be able to do this. I'm very grateful to be able to honor my ancestor and all of the people, unfortunately, who got wrapped up in this entire thing. And again, hopefully it educates some people and it makes you think just a little bit deeper and differently about
Hmm.
if you were accused falsely.
Yeah. And to not be able to like innocent till proven guilty. That's gone. You know that you're just
Let's not take that for granted anymore.
yeah, 100%. Yeah,
Yeah.
I still want to
Yeah.
move to Salem.
I'm right with you.
I'm still
Please.
going. Let's go.
I'm can't wait to visit.
Yeah, yeah,
It's on my list. My best witch
100%.
and I were planning a trip. One of these days we're gonna make it.
Yeah, 100. I want
'Cause
to
she wants
have.
to move there too. So
Yeah, I want Let's Get Freaky headquarters to be there. That's the goal going forward.
all right, bestie, because I know that you're listening right now, and she's cracking up right now, probably. I want you to know that if you move there and Tommy moves there, I might have to come out for like a month and we're gonna just hang out.
Let's go. Let's do it.
Thank you
JJ,
again so much.
thank you. I really appreciate you coming on, all the research you've done. Super interesting stuff. Thank you so much, JJ. Can
Thank
you
you.
tell the listeners where they can find you?
No. I'm just kidding.
They probably already know.
Absolutely not.
By now, they
Going
probably
into
already
hiding.
know.
I'm JJRose777 across the board YouTube channel. I will give Tommy my link tree, which has everything, all the socials, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. I don't do much on TikTok, but if you want to send me fun stuff, I'm always up for that. Feel free to reach out and say hi. You can always send me fun memes. I have a Discord if you want to be around other people like myself and just have an open forum where you can ask questions and mingle and chat. Please do. We have a wonderful, wonderful group of people. I am so incredibly blessed. I can't say that enough of the amount of beautiful people that I have found. You are not alone out there.
Awesome. Awesome, guys. Head over to the Discord. I'm on your Discord as well, but
You
I don't know what I'm doing on Discord. It's like another world. So I don't go on it. I don't go on it too often, but I am there and it is awesome. Awesome community. JJ, thank you so, so much. We're going to have you back very, very soon. You know that, and I can't wait. Guys,
I'm stoked.
thank you so much for listening. If you've enjoyed the show, share it where you can. That's a great way to support us. Make sure you come back for more freaky conversations. We're going to be back very soon. JJ, thank you so much. I love you. Guys,
I love you.
keep it freaky. Bye for now.